everybody. Happy holidays. I got a lot of really great feedback on the previous video that I made about AFB, and a lot of people really liked it. They said, even though I felt it was, really kind of low effort, low budget, editing thing, just like this is gonna be. But hey, people liked it, and they liked that I wore a crazy hat, so here we go, giving you guys what you asked for, back at you again. So this time I just want to talk a little bit about some things that you guys might want to look into buying. The holidays are here, and maybe you end up being given a gift certificate or some money towards your bee addiction, and you're kind of thinking about what you want to get, and I just have a few suggestions. Again, it's just my idea, my opinion, but if people want some ideas, here we go. Of course, first of all, I've got my little tree here. This is our Christmas tree for the year. And you can see it's not a pine tree, it's actually rosemary. And the great thing about this is that when we're done having it in the house, giving us a beautiful scent and decorating for the holidays, we can just plant it outside, because here, of course, in the Bay Area, rosemary is hardy year-round. And it'll bloom and provide some nice little forage for the bees. So if you kind of don't feel like going to the whole bother of putting up a big tree, or you need a little accent tree for somewhere, this is a really great choice as opposed to an evergreen tree, which of course doesn't provide for your bees. So let's talk about some other things that you might be looking at as you're, perusing those catalogs and getting all excited about what's available. First of all, I want to talk to the brand new beekeepers. These are people who have never had bees yet. Welcome. I'm supposing some of you might be joining the guild at this point and going online and looking for information and deciding that you're going to get into bees. So that's fantastic. I'm going to keep this list kind of short because I don't want to tell you a lot of what to get, because that's part of what you should be researching and deciding on your own. And I'm going to do a more in-depth video about like a basic kind of hive kit and beekeeping kit that I would recommend, but there's a lot of options out there. So I feel like you should just be spending the next month or so researching bees and seeing whether beekeeping is for you and thinking about what sort of approaches you want to take. So to help you do that, I'm going to recommend a few books. I'm kind of a book person for learning. It's a lot of how I found out about bees in the beginning, is either books or reading long form stuff online. This is a really, really great beginner's book called The Beekeeper's Handbook by Diana Samatero and Alphonse Abitable. I'm probably butchering their names, but I'm definitely promoting their book. As with all beekeeping books, you want to get the most up-to-date edition, and you really want to avoid anything that is very old, especially something from like literally now last century, because it won't address things like the varroa mite that you really need to know about in there. Anyhow, this is a great book. It was my first beekeeping book. It has lots of really good diagrams and things in it. It has a lot of basic information about bees and how they work, and also about beekeeping. Now, it is a fairly robust read, I would say. It's not like a real short form thing, which is good news, bad news. I find that there's so much information in here that even years later, I'm still referring back to this book sometimes to check out things and remind myself of information. But if you're somebody who really, really doesn't like to read that much, this is maybe not the book for you. And in your case, I would recommend instead get this other book, Beekeeping for Dummies. Okay, we all know about the For Dummies format. We probably all learn a lot of things about computers or whatever from these books, and it's just kind of their classic thing. It has lots of little black and white pictures in here, and it kind of doesn't have as much text. It tends to be like a lot of bulleted lists or step-by-step, and of course their kind of trademark easy, accessible, slightly humorous approach with comics and stuff in between the chapters. So I feel like it's a little lighter, but it would still get you started. You know, you're going to eventually want something more in-depth if you stick with bees, I think, but at least it'll give you that little background that you need there. So those are both really good books, just generally on beekeeping. So the point that I like to hammer home over and over again is that beekeeping is very regional, and because our area of the country is so unusual, it has such a different climate than basically everywhere else in the country and most of the other places where they speak English and keep bees. So you do need to really kind of fine-tune that information according to our local climate and our local beekeeping year, which is very different. So for instance, a book like that might tell you that you're going to start looking out for signs of swarming in April. If you do that here, your bees are probably already swarmed. They may even have done that at the end of February. Remember that, you know, we have daffodils and sometimes even roses budding in February and March. And that's a time when kind of the rest of the country may be up to here in snow. So it's really good to have something that's going to help you stay on track with our beekeeping year, which of course I absolutely recommend that you join the Beekeepers Guild of San Mateo, because there's lots of information to be had from the people and resources there about it, really good local information. But I do also recommend that you try to get a local book. And this is a really excellent book, Beekeeping in Coastal California by Jeremy Rose. Now it's not as in-depth on the how to keep bees, bee biology kind of thing here. As you can see, it's a fairly short book. So I feel like it's a good supplement to a more in-depth book, because what it does is it breaks down everything that happens in our beekeeper year here in Northern California by month. Now he's talking about right on the coast, so you know, if you're not right on the coast down in Half Moon Bay or something, your schedule might be slightly different than what he's got in here, especially if you're living somewhere that's, you know, quite a bit hotter, a bit more inland, like, you know, you're in South San Jose or something like that. But with this book, you're going to at least be doing things more or less in this right month, whereas in the if you follow along information that's meant for Michigan or something, you're not even going to be doing things in the right season. So this will get you a lot closer. It also has some fantastic information about what forage is available in what months, and also a lot of information about this thing that we have here called the late summer and fall dearth, which is very different than most of the country. So really, really great book. Really bad news is it's fairly expensive for the length that it is. I still think it's a great value, but unfortunately now it's also out of print. So you may or may not be able to find it. Maybe you can find it used or something, but it's a really good option. Shameless shill here. I'm actually going to be writing and publishing an ebook about beekeeping in the Bay Area that's just intended for beginners. So that'll be another option that you can get in order to get a supplemental book to your main beekeeping book that helps you to adapt your beekeeping practices to our Bay Area realities. So I'm really big on books, as you can see. And that's really something that I think your completely newbie beekeeper who's never had bees before should focus on this month. Second year beekeepers. Now, even if you haven't had bees for 12 months yet, I am still talking to you if you had bees last year or for a part of last year. Even if they didn't survive now into the spring, you're still a second year beekeeper, and you're going to kind of have different needs, and you're in a different situation than somebody who's starting out completely from scratch. They don't know anything, they don't have any comb drawn, they maybe haven't bought their equipment yet. So things that you will need. If you haven't already, you probably want to go out and get those supers and frames that you need for your hive. So if you only have brood boxes from last year, or maybe brood boxes and then one super or something, you want to have a few more. I like to have, I would say 3, maybe 4 supers per hive. So that's in addition to whatever you're using for your brood box. I'm not saying anything about what you're using there. You can be using like all mediums, as I often do, and you've got 3 of those that you're using as your brood box, or you can be using a deep, you can be using a double deep, a deep and a half, whatever. But in addition to that, once you've supering on there, I'm going to say you're going to want to have 3 or 4 extra there with the frames, and you want them just ready to go. And the reason I'm talking about this now, when it's, you know, getting to be the middle of winter and not in the spring, is that everybody kind of puts it off. They get distracted. Maybe their, you know, springtime beekeeping enthusiasm wanes a little bit as we get into the late spring and early summer, and they end up not having it ready when they need it. They don't get it on there. The bees can't fill supers that are in the garage with honey, and they'll end up swarming on you as well. So I recommend that you get them. If you need to assemble them, paint them, whatever, put wax on the foundation. As soon as they come in, mark your calendar and try to get that done, you know, within a month of doing it. Don't just put them aside, because you're going to go out there and you're going to have a situation in your hive, and you're going to want a super, or you're going to want to split, and you don't have anything to do that with, and that's just not going to be a good feeling. That's not setting yourself up for success. So they're not terribly exciting, but on the other hand, they are what is going to allow you to grow your apiary, and of course to get that honey harvest that you're hopefully going to get as a second-year beekeeper, even if you didn't get it last year. Another thing that you want to consider that I think are nice to haves, you don't need these to do beekeeping. I don't recommend them necessarily in the beginner beekeeping kit. But I think a frame perch and a frame gripper / lifter are really, really nice to have. So this is a frame perch, and it just sits on the side of your hive, and then as you pull frames out, you can hang them here, you know, 3 or 4 of them out there along to the side. That gives you room to move in there, and you can sort things out depending on what you need to do in your hive. They're not super expensive, they're not super cheap, but they're a nice thing to have, and once you've got one, you're set for life. A frame gripper or lifter, I find these also really, really helpful because I have rheumatoid arthritis and my pinch grip is just very, very weak, so I have difficulty gripping a frame and pulling it up. Also, you can see I'm a kind of a teeny weeny armed girl here, and I just do not have gobs and gobs of strength in my forearm, whereas if I use one of these frame grips, I can really get a good lift, and I can maybe even kind of get some of my weight behind it and lift up on the frames. So here you go. These are really great. They come in a bunch of different varieties, and you just use them to help ease those frames out, especially now that you're getting into your second year. The bees have probably added a lot of propolis, maybe even some burr comb around, and it's just more difficult to lift frames out, especially deep frames from the outside that are full of honey. So really nice to have thing, just makes everything a lot easier in your beekeeping inspections. Let's see, what else is a really good thing to have? Oh, I have this excellent little booklet here. It's called An Apiary Guide to Swarm Control. You can see that it's really, really tiny, and you're gonna be like, Elizabeth, why do you want me to drop 13 bucks on this tiny little booklet? That's because swarming is something that you are really going to have to deal with and hopefully prevent in your apiary in the second year. Even if you give those bees unlimited space, they are still going to probably want to swarm on a second year queen. So this is an issue that you need to know about, and this is a great booklet. Even though it's short, even though it's kind of expensive for how short it is, it has great information explaining about swarming and about different methods that you can use to control it. Now, one thing that is slightly not ideal about this is that it is a publication from the UK, and so it assumes that you are using something that they commonly use there, which is basically kind of like a deep, only it has 12 frames in it, with a medium on top of it as your brood box. So when you see the diagrams and you see the step-by-step instructions, it's assuming that. But, you know, if you're just thoughtful, smart person and you sit down with a pencil and paper and look at this for a little while, you can easily adapt all that information for whatever brood box kind of situation you actually had. And you can look at all the different methods here for controlling swarming. So this is a great one, an apiary guide to swarm control by Wally Shaw. Really fantastic little booklet packed with information for it. Let's see. Another book that you might want to consider as you're kind of becoming an intermediate. This is also fine as a beginner book, but it's more expensive and it goes into a lot of really advanced stuff. More advanced stuff in detail. You can see it's quite a large book. So I don't recommend it as highly as the two that I already recommended for beginners, but it's another option, again, if you're someone who likes to read a lot. This is a Practical Beekeeping by Michael Bush. Now, he does have a sort of natural beekeeping, non-treatment, what he calls kind of lazy beekeeping way of approaching things, but you know what, he's just a heck of a nice guy, and even if you aren't into that side of it, there's nothing in here that's going to offend you. He's not, you know, rabidly denouncing people who do things differently. He's just giving his own methods. Just a really kind of nice guy, and it's pleasant to read his stuff. So unless you're a really just die-hard treater and you just never want to hear anything from anyone who doesn't, this is a really great book. Lots of it is covers things that aren't necessarily to do with treating anyhow, stuff like how to raise queens, how to make splits, that kind of information in there. So really fun book, good stuff. Diagrams and pictures in it are not as fantastic as the other ones I recommended, but there is lots of information and it's a very pleasant read. Another thing that you really want to have your second year, I think, is a nuke box or a nook box, depending on how you like to say it, which is a nucleus colony box, but no one calls them that. So that is basically a mini hive. Typically they hold 5 frames in them, and you can use that when you're making a split. You can use it for carrying frames around in your apiary in small amounts, which I like to do because 5 frames weighs a lot less than 10 frames. You can use them they're great for going out and catching swarms. I like them because they're small and light, and I can throw them in the back of my truck, and then I can just carry them out, put them under the swarm, knock the swarm down into it, and then you're good to go. You can get all kinds of ones from all the major suppliers. Frankly, even just a cheap one that's made of cardboard or plastic is totally fine and a good investment for you. I have here one from Man Lake. This is called their Prune, and they're really cheap. I think they're like 15 bucks each. And of course you can get the free shipping on them, which you can't always get on the type of plastic nook that folds together, the ones that are made out of corrugated plastic. Nice thing about these versus the paper and the other type of plastic nukes is that they're very easy to put together, especially if you kind of forgot to do that into the last moment and you've got a swarm up in a tree you gotta go grab. You can get this put together in just basically a matter of seconds, and they also nest together very easily for storage. So normally they have these little sticks in here that hold the frames up, and if you want to nest them for storage, you just take them out, throw them in the bottom, and it all nests really nicely and doesn't take up a lot of room. I have heard Oliver saying that he had one of these break in his truck. I haven't managed to break one yet, but do be careful of them. They are plastic. You know, if you smash them really hard against something, they are going to shatter. But for 15 bucks, I think they're a pretty good option. So get a nook box of some kind. Another thing is harvesting equipment. So if you're a member of the guild, of course, you're going to be able to borrow the guild extractor, and you're not going to need all of that. But you will still need to provide your own equipment for getting the bees off of your comb. There's a lot of different options for that. Look in the catalogs. You're going to need your own buckets, preferably with honey gates. You're going to need a set of sieves, and of course you're going to need your own jars. So again, it's one of those things that if you go out and you order those while you're still feeling enthusiastic and excited and you're waiting for your beekeeping year to begin, then you've got them ready for when you need to do your extraction. And of course remember that if your bees should die, unfortunately, sometimes they do, hope not, but if they should die over the winter, you really need to go and harvest all that honey out of those combs and preserve those combs for next year's bees. And so that might mean that you might end up doing a harvest kind of on really short notice, because you can't just leave that that hive out there. It'll probably get robbed out, and you also don't want to leave it there, because if there's some hive beetle larvae in there, they're just going to reproduce like crazy, and the whole thing is going to be a wriggly, fermenting, spoiled mess, and then the wax moths move in, they eat all your comb, everything. So you might end up having to extract and store that comb, like I say, on short notice. So it's great to have your extracting equipment all ready. Then you can just call up one of our extractor hostesses, get the extractor, do your extraction, bottle it all up, and you're good until you get your bees next year. Okay, so now we want to talk to your kind of more intermediate advanced beekeepers, those people who are in their 3rd year plus. So you probably already have a really good idea of stuff that you are looking for, but here's just a few suggestions. If you haven't already, I really recommend getting a good ventilated suit. I know some people prefer to do beekeeping in their shorts or whatever. Those of us who don't like that so much, or can't do that because of beekeeping allergies or whatever, a ventilated suit is like the next best thing. So I wear mine in the summertime with shorts and a tank top underneath, and it's just amazing how much cooler and more comfortable it is working in the ventilated suit than it is wearing a regular bee jacket, or even, you know, having to wear long pants or long sleeves in the apiary. My suit is from Ultra Breeze, which is one of, I think, kind of the more expensive brands, but it is a really high quality suit, and I've had it many years now, and it is still pretty much going strong. It seems to be quite durable. A couple of features that mine has that I really like, that I'd like to call out, is that it has zippers that both go down the side of the legs and also up from the bottom of the legs. So that means you can unzip if you need to get your cell phone or car keys or whatever out of your pocket, and then zip it back up. Always make sure you do that, otherwise you are going to get stung in the butt. And you can also unzip the leg up to the knees to get like your boots on and off if you want to change out of them when you're getting it back into the house or whatever. It makes it a lot easier to get in and out of it. It also has a detachable hood so that you can put the rest of the suit in the wash, and then you can swish the hood out in soapy water. And you can also replace the hood if eventually the mesh on it gets old and fails or whatever like that. So it's really, really nice thing to have, and it's really great feeling that you're kind of almost invincible in the bee yard as you're working. I have never actually been stung through my suit, and that's even when I've been like trying to crawl around up in attics going after bees that were living in people's houses and stuff like that. So really nice thing to have when you're ready to kind of graduate from that weekend warrior economy jacket thing that maybe you had going on before. Nice to have. So let's see. Advanced bee books. So of course, many of you probably heard that Thomas Seeley had a new book last year, The Lives of Bees, and it is, I think, also available in softcover now. Really, really interesting book. I actually have done a full review of this book which I think is going into the San Mateo December newsletter. I might actually do a video review of that as well. And really interesting. Now, it is Seeley, and he is a scientist, and he is really into math, so there's lots and lots of science and math in here. It's not a really simple read, but I think once you get past the first few chapters, you're really going to be sucked into the fascinating stuff that he has to tell us about how bees live in wild colonies. And there are a lot of implications for stuff that you might want to consider taking into account when you're doing your backyard beekeeping. And he actually has a chapter that spells that out for you in the end, if you haven't managed to draw your own conclusions from some of the ideas that he has in here. Anyhow, really interesting book. It is clearly written, even if it is a demanding scientific sort of book. Another great book that again is kind of scientific. This is The Biology of the Honeybee by Mark Winston. This is an older book, so it isn't really getting into things like varroa and so forth, but for just basic information about how bees work, how their anatomy works, how they do some of their regulatory functions. This is also a very good and interesting book. It's the kind of book that I think you would read if you were studying entomology in college. So again, it's not a super fluffy for dummies kind of book, but it has lots of really interesting stuff that you might want to learn about. Because I find that if you understand the biology, the behavior, the physiology of bees and their hives, it lets you really understand why we do the things that we do with the hive, and why some things work and other things don't, if you understand those principles behind it. So this is a really nice resource for that. So some other great little gadgets and stuff. Again, not these are necessary for basic beekeeping, but you know, at this point maybe you want to splurge on some nice optional extras. One thing I like to recommend is a really nice uncapping fork. The cheap ones have rounded tines that look kind of like needles, but you can see here, this one has flat tines, kind of like a fork. A regular fork you might eat your dinner with. Okay, so I find that this just works considerably better if you're doing hand uncapping like this. Now, if you buy this on Man Lake or something, I think they want like 30 bucks for it, and it isn't worth 30 bucks as opposed to the $2.99 for the cheap one. But you can get it on eBay or Amazon, and I think it's more like 10 or 15 bucks. It's probably worth the 10 or 15 bucks if you have a lot to do and you like using an uncapping fork. It's nice to have. A lot of people like to use the hot uncappers, and we do have those available with the extractor from the guild. I'm saying we, I'm of course not on the board anymore, but you know, I still want to feel that I'm a part of the guild. But I actually don't like using the hot uncappers. Not that I have an objection to it philosophically or whatever. I just find it really awkward and heavy, and just don't care for it as much. What I like to use is a really thin, sharp bread knife for uncapping, and that's what I do all my uncapping with now, is a combination of this and then getting into some of the little hard to reach places with that uncapping fork. So this is actually a really great one. This is just a knife that I happen to have lying around. It's meant for bread that you made in like a bread machine or something, but it really just rips on through, taking the cappings off of honey, and it's great. You can find these on eBay for sure, and I think you can probably get them for less than 20 bucks. Let's see. Another thing that you might want to consider if you plan to show your bees off this year, or you're planning on breeding your own queens, which I think is just a really fun thing to get involved with, is a queen marking cage. You see mine is well used. You can get this, they call it a one-handed. I've never been able to do anything one-handed in the apiary, but hey, I'm clumsy. I shouldn't be allowed to keep bees. So this is a one-handed queen catcher. You get her in here and you use this little kind of press crush thing to squish her up there, and then you mark her through that. I'm going to do a video showing exactly how you do that at some point. I've also done an article on it, and it'll be in the book. And then you want a Posca pen is probably one of the easiest options. This brand of pen is great. Next year's color, 2020, is blue. My favorite color, yay! You can mark in any shade of blue. And again, this is one of those things that sometimes is cheaper if you buy somewhere else and not actually from a bee supplier, if you just buy it at like an art store or something like that. And you can even get a different color, like if you don't want this dark navy blue and you want more like an electric blue, go ahead. Or, you know, maybe you want to mark your queens in purple or something. Just doesn't really matter if you're not trying to sell them what color you use, but that's a great option if you want to mark your queens. Not everybody needs to, but it can be a nice thing to do. Speaking of showing off your bees, an observation hive can be a nice thing if you plan on going out to some of these events and you want to bring some bees with you and show them off to people. You want to bring it around to visit school children, that kind of thing. That can be really nice. There's some out there that you can get that are basically like a 5-frame nuke, and you put your 4 frames in the bottom plus a feeder, and then you pull up the frame with the queen and you put it in a chamber above that has the glass in it, and the bees can live in there for quite some time, going up and down and taking care of the queen, but people can still see her laying in there. So that's really, really fun. Let's see, what else is great? Oh, some of the people in the guild like to get those full-sized restaurant sheet pans in there, and they use those underneath the hive bodies when they're moving honey around, or they have stickies that they're bringing back outside so it doesn't drip all over your carpet. Some people even use those as temporary hive covers, which sounds really cool. I haven't used them. Maybe I'll have to get some at some point and try that out, but they do sound really, really handy. Another thing that I think is really useful is having a torch to light your smoker with. You can get the big propane one that's like for welding. I have one of those, thank you Bee Buddy, but I also have this one, which is another option and even less expensive, maybe a little bit more portable. It's just a kitchen torch that is meant for doing like creme brulee, or those of you who do dabs, it's for that, you know, and you can just light it up and use it to light your smoker. You can use it to sanitize your hive tool, make creme brulee, whatever. Again, these tend to be quite inexpensive on Amazon. I think you can probably get one for like 12 or 15 bucks there. And then it has a little nozzle here that you can refill it with the gas that you need in there. If you don't have one of these and you're still struggling with matches, I would say even at the intermediate or even beginner level, do yourself a favor and at least get like a cheap dollar store barbecue lighter to light your smoker with, because life just isn't long enough to be trying to keep your matches alight when the wind is blowing and trying to get your smoker lit on there. So, and of course, finally, the other option is, who does not want another hive at that point, you know? So consider expanding your apiary. Do you want to have another hive? If you don't already have 2 hives I think is actually easier to maintain than 1, because you always have the ability to sort of rekindle one hive from another hive, and you always have the ability to compare the 2 hives. So if one of them is not being very active and the other one is, then you know probably there's a problem. Whereas if you just have 1 hive, you don't know whether that's because the weather isn't so great today and you shouldn't expect activity, or if something's actually wrong. So that's another great thing to consider, is expanding your apiary, maybe even branching out into a new hive type if you want, or maybe you prefer the convenience of having everything be interchangeable and you're going to get more of the same in there. Whatever you do, I hope you guys have really happy holidays, and I wish you all the very best in the new year, in your beekeeping and in your lives hives and for all of you and all of your families. So take care. Happy holidays. Bye-bye.